The torn boarding pass fell to the floor like a cold verdict. Melissa Grant did not just rip a piece of paper, she tore straight through the dignity of the man standing in front of her. Everything started in that single moment, a moment that made the entire first-class cabin of Pacific Air Flight, number 482, fall silent. Ethan Walker, 38 years old, a CEO disguised as an ordinary passenger, stood frozen as the two halves of his ticket trembled in the breeze of the cabin air. He said nothing. He did not react. But deep in his dark eyes, a storm was forming. Melissa swept her gaze over him from head to toe. A black t-shirt, dark jeans, no expensive watch, no polished leather shoes. A man she assumed could never belong in seat 2A. "You do not belong in first class," she said, her voice sharp and cold, as if she were stating an obvious truth that required no verification. Trevor Mills, her colleague, who always carried a mocking smirk, stepped forward with a quiet laugh. "Your place is back there." His words pulled the attention of several passengers, including Anna Powell and Jason Reed. They did not know exactly what was happening, but their eyes were immediately drawn to the contempt dripping from Melissa's tone. The moment stretched, the air thickened, as if even the atmosphere understood it had just witnessed something deeply wrong. Ethan still did not speak. He simply offered his ID and the email confirming his seat. Melissa did not even look at them. These are probably fake. The seat has been reassigned. Her accusation sliced at his pride, a humiliation wrapped in public disdain and the familiar raised eyebrow of someone who believed their tiny sliver of authority allowed them to decide who deserved what. But Ethan was not a man who shattered easily. He swallowed the anger rising in his chest, not the kind that erupts with shouting, but the kind that sharpens quietly like a blade in the dark. He was not here to be served. He was here to observe, to confirm the rumors the PR department had been dodging for months, rumors that Pacific Air judged passengers by appearance long before scanning their tickets. And now, somehow, he had walked straight into the very problem he came to uncover. Captain Robert Hayes arrived with the stern face of a man dealing with a troublemaker. "If you do not leave this seat, we will have to remove you from the aircraft." That was when the pieces of truth began shifting. A VIP couple. Thomas and Rebecca Whitman stepped forward with champagne glasses in their hands. They looked at Ethan with mild confusion, but said nothing when Melissa coldly guided them to seat 2A, the seat that belonged to him. At the back of the cabin, Lily Chen, a 22-year-old intern, stood frozen. She had seen Ethan's ticket when it passed through the scanner. Valid. Green. She knew that. She remembered it. But Melissa's voice carried a weight that crushed everything. Lily was not yet confident enough to trust her judgment, her courage, her sense of right and wrong. "Do not interfere," Melissa hissed. Lily bit her lip, but her trembling hand slipped into the pocket of her coat and pressed the recording button. A small choice, a fearful action, but one that would change everything. Anna Powell lifted her phone first and whispered into the camera, "They are doing something wrong." Jason Reed shifted his angle and began recording too. In that moment, Ethan felt something shift, not his own downfall, but the collapse of a system so accustomed to mistreating those they believed did not belong. Melissa snatched Ethan's ID and ripped the boarding pass in half right in front of everyone. The crack of tearing paper was so loud it made the whole cabin flinch. A passenger in row 3 whispered, "My God." Another shook his head. Unbelievable. Ethan was not angry. He was disappointed. Disappointed that what he had feared was not just a rumor. It lived, it breathed, it stood right in front of him in every contemptuous look, every dismissive word, every petty display of power. But beneath that disappointment was a cold, steady calm. Because Ethan knew one thing: every action has consequences. He lifted his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Samantha," he said, his voice, low and steady, "record everything and prepare for the next step." On the other end, his assistant, Samantha Cole, replied as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Understood. I will notify them." From her seat, Anna watched the man being humiliated, then murmured, "Something is off. He does not look like someone who will back down." Ethan slowly picked up the 2 torn pieces from the floor. Melissa laughed, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Oh, please, why bother picking that up? The ticket is worthless now." But Ethan simply lifted his eyes. The look he gave her made Melissa instinctively step back, half a pace. Not the look of a powerless man, not the look of someone desperate to explain himself. It was the look of someone who knew exactly where his real authority came from. No one understood that yet. But they were about to, because in that brief, deafening silence, Ethan Walker made a decision. He would not leave the seat that was rightfully his, and none of them had any idea what truth was about to come crashing down on them. And this right here was the moment the real storm began. The first-class cabin felt stretched tight by an invisible wire as Ethan Walker sat back down, not in seat 2A that had been taken from him, but in an empty seat he chose temporarily so he could observe. No one knew that the man who had just been humiliated was hiding a truth powerful enough to shake Pacific Air to its core. And that truth was pounding in his chest like an alarm bell. He came on this flight not to relax, not to enjoy any privilege, but to confront the darkness inside a system he had heard far too many complaints about, yet had never witnessed with his own eyes. The PR reports always called incidents minor misunderstandings, customers being overly sensitive. But Ethan, a man who had built his life from nothing, never believed in pretty words painted to hide ugliness. He believed in eyes, in the unmistakable feeling of being treated unfairly, a feeling he had known well in the early years of his career. And now that same feeling was unfolding right in front of him, inside the first-class cabin of an airline he had helped build. Ethan tightened his hand slightly, remembering the anonymous emails from recent weeks. Flight attendants discriminate against passengers who are not dressed expensively. The captain covers for crew when there is an incident. Passengers with darker skin always get their tickets checked more aggressively. Those lines had seemed like petty complaints until Ethan decided to fly undercover to see the truth for himself. And now everything was clearer than he expected. Melissa was not just wrong, she was deliberate. Trevor was not just irresponsible, he was complicit. And Captain Hayes was not merely biased, he weaponized his authority against an innocent man. But what startled Ethan was not the misconduct itself, it was the eyes around him. The eyes of passengers who were quietly watching, recording, growing furious. There was Anna Powell, the sharp-eyed blonde woman, holding her phone pointed directly at Melissa, her lips pressed into a tight line of anger. There was Jason Reed, the man a few rows back, recording the entire scene and whispering, "This will be evidence." But the most important eyes belonged to Lily Chen, the young trainee standing near the cabin wall, her hand trembling slightly as she held the phone, secretly recording. Lily was only 22, barely past a few weeks of training. She still believed in what was right, believed in fairness, believed that good people should not be treated like trash simply because they did not look wealthy. That belief was what pushed Lily to stand against her superiors. but fear clung to her like a soaked blanket over her head. If she spoke up, who would believe a trainee? And if she stayed silent, how long would this continue? Meanwhile, Melissa stood calmly in front of the Whitmans, the wealthy couple sipping champagne in the seat that was rightfully Ethan's. "Sorry for the little inconvenience," Melissa said sweetly, her voice honeyed in stark contrast to the venom she had unleashed on Ethan. Thomas Whitman chuckled. "It's fine as long as we have our seats." But Rebecca, always observant, felt unease bloom in her chest. She looked at Ethan, then at Melissa, then whispered, "Something is not right." In the corner of the cabin, Trevor Mills laughed again, as if he were watching a comedy. He probably printed a fake ticket, Trevor said. Someone like that sitting in first class. His words cut through the air and through the hearts of anyone who had ever been judged by appearance alone. Ethan heard every word, but he did not let emotion sweep him away. He knew blind anger would not help. He simply observed, waiting for the right moment. His phone lit up. A message from Samantha, red alert sent to the board. "Say the word." Ethan stared at the message. One word, just one, and the careers of Melissa, Trevor, and Hayes could end instantly. But Ethan did not do it. Not yet. He wanted to see more, to understand deeper, to know exactly how decayed his system had become. In row 4, a 15-year-old boy tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mum, why are they doing that?" He didn't do anything wrong. The mother's voice trembled. Sometimes people think they have the right to judge others just because they wear a uniform. Ethan heard all of it, saw all of it, and his chest tightened sharply. Because he had once been that child, he had once asked that same question, and that question was why he fought to build something better, an airline, where anyone, regardless of wealth or skin color, would be treated with respect. But today, that ideal was being crushed under the feet of people wearing Pacific Air uniforms without the Pacific Air spirit. At the front, Captain Hayes returned to the cabin. "This cannot continue," he growled. "I'll call security to remove him right now." Melissa nodded with satisfaction. Trevor folded his arms, grinning. Anna began live streaming. Jason typed his caption, "This is discrimination, clear as daylight." And at that moment, Lily Chen took a single step toward Ethan. One step small, but enough to change everything. She trembled, but her eyes shone with determination. Mr. Walker, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I scanned your ticket. It was valid. They are lying." Ethan looked at her, and his gaze softened. Thank God, he thought that there were still people who believed in what was right. "Do you have proof?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded. Her hand opened the phone in her pocket, the recording file running. Every cruel word from Melissa and Trevor was captured, clearly exposing the truth, like light cutting through filth. Ethan exhaled slowly, deeply, as if he had just seen the beginning of the end. Because he knew this moment was not personal. It was historic. The moment a young woman dared to speak up. The moment dozens of passengers dared to stand with a stranger. The moment an entire system would be forced to confront itself. And the moment Ethan Walker decided he would not stay silent another second. He looked at Lily and nodded. "Keep the evidence. Prepare for what comes next." The airplane cabin felt like it was holding its final breath before the storm hit. And Ethan knew the next part would change everything forever. The entire first-class cabin seemed to tighten when Captain Hayes returned to the aisle, his face rigid as if he were dealing with a threat instead of an innocent passenger. His voice cut through the rows, sharp and cold, scraping against the air like metal, dragging across glass. This is your final warning. If you do not leave first class immediately, you will be escorted off this aircraft. The threat dropped into the cabin like a stone, heavy and suffocating. Melissa stood just behind him, arms crossed, a faint smirk curling her lips, as if everything was finally going her way. Trevor leaned against the cabin wall, the edge of his mouth twisted in a mocking grin. To them, Ethan was nothing more than a nuisance to be removed as quickly as possible. They had no idea they were trying to throw out the wrong man. Ethan lifted his gaze, his eyes calm like a midnight lake, but beneath the surface, a storm churned. "I will not leave a seat I paid for." He said each word, steady, clear, unwavering, carrying the authority of someone who knew exactly where he stood. The cabin fell into silence. A man standing up to a crew, drunk on false authority. It made the entire space feel like it was waiting for something to explode. Air pressed tight, ready to burst. Melissa stepped forward half a pace, her voice clipped. "You are no longer in the system. That seat is not yours." Lily Chen felt her heart hammer inside her chest, because she had been the one who watched Melissa delete Ethan's name from the seating log. Her hand trembled so hard she had to grip her phone to keep from dropping it. Ethan drew a deep breath, scanning the faces around him, seeing confusion, anger, sympathy all directed at him. He stood not to retreat, but to confront the truth unfolding in plain sight. "You are making a serious mistake," Ethan said, his voice low, but resonant like a drumbeat. "And not just with me, but with everyone who is watching how you treat a passenger." Trevor let out a loud laugh. "My God, who does he think he is?" But Anna Powell stepped forward, raising her phone like a banner of justice. "He didn't do anything wrong. I recorded everything. His ticket is valid. You people just refuse to believe it because he's not dressed like first class." "Turn that camera off now," Melissa snapped. "You're violating airline regulations." Anna didn't lower her phone. "Airline regulations, or your regulations to hide what you just did." Jason Reed stood up from the back row, his voice deep and firm. "If you force him off this plane, I will live stream immediately. This is discrimination. Plain as day." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Whispers turned into clear voices. "This is too much, poor guy. They're abusing power. Who's going to step in?" Captain Hayes flushed red, not from shame, but from being challenged in front of passengers. He moved closer to Ethan, hand hovering near his shoulder, voice commanding sit or get off. Choose. But before he could touch Ethan, Carla Torres, the airport security officer who had been summoned earlier, stepped in. Her eyes showed conflict, but her professionalism held her in place. "So you are forcing me to escort you off if you do not comply with the crew." Ethan turned to her, his calm gaze making her hesitate. "Do you really want to do that? When you know I've done nothing wrong? When everyone here knows I've done nothing wrong?" Carla's fist tightened slightly, her fingers trembling. She was trapped between duty and conscience. But before she could respond, Lily Chen suddenly stepped forward. A small woman, but what she did was large enough to freeze the entire cabin. Captain Hayes Lily said, her voice shaky but clear. "I have proof." I heard Melissa and Trevor talking. They knew his ticket was valid. They even mocked him. The cabin went dead silent. Melissa's face drained of color. Trevor stepped back in panic. Captain Hayes snapped toward her, his voice sharp. "What did you just say?" Lily pulled out her phone, her trembling finger tapping the recording. Melissa's voice blasted through, bitter and undeniable. He definitely can't afford first class. Just say it's fake and erase his name. Then Trevor's laugh followed. Exactly. Put the Whitmans there. Who cares? The words echoed through the cabin like an unmistakable indictment. Anna's mouth dropped open. Jason whispered, "Oh my God." A man in row 5 shot to his feet. "That's enough." Melissa went pale as ash. Trevor stuttered. It was just a joke. Ethan looked directly at them. A joke by deleting a passenger from the system. A joke by lying to the captain. A joke by humiliating me in front of a cabin full of people. Melissa couldn't answer. Her throat tightened as if an invisible hand gripped it. But what truly shifted the cabin was not the recording. It was the moment Ethan slowly lifted his phone, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. A deep, commanding voice answered immediately Ethan. "We're in an emergency meeting. Do you need to activate CEO authority?" The cabin snapped toward Ethan. Melissa whispered, face drained, "Ethan Walker." Trevor froze, eyes wide. Captain Hayes stepped back, as if the floor slanted beneath him. Ethan met their eyes, his voice calm, cold as steel. "Yes. Activate CEO authority right now." The voice on the phone replied, "Understood. All decisions made by Ethan Walker are approved. Any employee who interferes will be suspended immediately." The cabin exploded in gasps. Everyone understood what they had just witnessed. Melissa stammered, No way, you're the CEO." Ethan looked at her not with hatred, but with truth. "Not arm." "Melissa. I always was." And in that moment, their fake authority collapsed like a sand castle in a storm. The cabin fell silent. Passengers stared at Ethan, the man who had been humiliated, judged stripped of dignity, now standing firm at the center of the storm. They understood this was no longer an argument on a plane. This was history. This was a man standing against injustice. This was a system being forced to face itself. This was the moment Ethan Walker began taking everything back with calm intelligence and unshakable resolve. And everything was only beginning. The moment the name Ethan Walker, Chief Executive Officer of Pacific Air, echoed through the cabin, the entire first-class section seemed to exhale at once, a single breath that had been held far too long. Melissa Grant nearly collapsed, gripping the seat back as if the floor had vanished beneath her. Trevor Mills stood frozen lips, trembling, unable to form a single word. Captain Hayes, the man who had wielded his authority to threaten Ethan less than 10 minutes earlier, had gone pale, his throat tightening as if squeezed by an invisible hand. In all his years as a pilot, he had faced countless emergencies, but never one where the real danger came from his own choices. Ethan didn't speak. He simply stood there calm in a silence so deep, the low vibration of the engines beneath the cabin became painfully clear. But that silence didn't last. It was only the stillness before the flood as the cabin erupted in whispers, outrage, and voices no longer willing to be restrained. I knew something was wrong from the start. Anna Powell practically shouted, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and relief. I recorded everything. All of it. No one can twist the truth now. Jason Reed lifted his phone and pointed it straight at Melissa, his voice steady as steel. "You just discriminated against the CEO of your own airline. Good luck with that." A man in row 5 slammed his hand against the seat. Unacceptable. This is not how an airline treats a customer. Any customer. A middle-aged woman pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying her racing heart. My God, how many times have they done this? Where no one noticed. A young mother in row 3 hugged her son closer, whispering, "You see, sweetheart, never stay silent when someone is treated unfairly." The boy nodded, eyes wide, as he stared at Ethan, a man who had transformed from victim to something far larger than any lesson found in a classroom. As the cabin swelled with emotion, Melissa stumbled toward Ethan, her voice shaking. "Mr. Walker, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Ethan looked at her with a calm that was far more frightening than anger. "Yes, you did not know. And that is the problem. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could." Melissa burst into tears. Trevor scrambled for a scrap of pride, stammering, I was just following Melissa's lead." Anna spun toward him, her voice sharp as a blade. "You didn't just follow. You mocked him. You belittled him. You said he didn't belong here. You helped this happen." Trevor fell silent, lost, cornered by his own actions. Captain Hayes gathered what little courage he had, left. "Mr. Walker, I apologize." "I misjudged the situation," Ethan interrupted, for the first time dropping the absolute calm he had held no captain. "You did not misjudge. You did not judge at all. You listened blindly to your crew without verifying the truth. You used authority to intimidate instead of responsibility to protect your passengers." Hayes lowered his head, a veteran pilot finally forced to accept that he had let his honor crash to the ground. But while he sank under the weight of his actions, the spotlight shifted to Lily Chen, the tiny intern with a heart larger than the aircraft itself. Passengers turned their admiring eyes toward her. A man whispered, "She's incredibly brave." A woman nodded. If not for her, the truth would have been buried. Lily, cheeks flushed, but eyes steady, whispered, "I just did what was right." Ethan turned to her gratitude, filling his voice. "Lily, you did what many grown adults do not dare to do. You stood on the side of truth." Melissa snapped toward Lily in desperation. "You're just a trainee. You don't have the right to interfere." Lily lifted her chin, no longer trembling. "I have the right to be a human being, and the right to do what's right." The cabin erupted again this time, with murmurs of admiration. In that very moment, Ethan's phone rang. He placed it on speaker. Sarah Mitchell from the Pacific Air Board spoke clearly. "Ethan, we reviewed the recording. Your CEO authority is being activated immediately. We have suspended the entire crew involved in the incident." Melissa broke down, sobbing. Trevor went pale. Captain Hayes let his arms fall to his sides, as if everything he had built had just collapsed. Jason began clapping. Then another person. And another. The applause spread through the cabin in waves not loud and chaotic, but strong, deliberate, a collective recognition of what had just taken place. But Ethan did not smile. This was not a victory. This was exposure. Proof that the darkness within the system was not rumor, but something alive, breathing, hurting people. Melissa stumbled forward, voice cracking. "Please, I can fix this." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "The only thing you can fix is the way you treat people." But that opportunity no longer exists at Pacific Air. Melissa collapsed into a seat, burying her face in her hands, as if her world had caved in. Trevor turned away, unable to meet a single pair of eyes. Captain Hayes whispered his final admission. "I accept full responsibility." Ethan gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of a truth finally spoken. At that moment, Samantha called back Ethan. "The replacement crew is on the way." "Do you want to say anything to the cabin?" Ethan inhaled deeply. He looked around at the faces turned toward him, the people who stood up for him, for justice, for truth. And he said, "Thank you, all of you, not for standing with me, but for standing with what is right." Silence has never changed anything, but today you spoke up. Applause rose again, louder, more unified, shaking the cabin like a wave of hope. Ethan looked toward seat 2. The seat that belonged to him, the seat that had been taken. And he knew that when he sat there again, it would not be just a seat. It would be a statement. In that moment, surrounded by hundreds of eyes and hearts beating together, Ethan understood that the real battle had just begun. But this time he would not fight alone. The moment the last echoes of applause faded, the air inside the first-class cabin of Pacific Air Flight number 482 transformed into something heavier than outrage and sharper than shock. It became steel. It became a blade, the feeling of a small revolution igniting mid-air before the aircraft had even taken off. Ethan Walker felt the weight settle on his shoulders, not from fear, but from responsibility. The responsibility to witness, to judge, and to repair what had rotted inside the very system he had once trusted. Melissa Grant bowed her head, tears streaking down her cheeks, but the terror in her eyes was not about what she had done. It was about being forced to face the consequences, at last. Trevor Mills stood stiff fists trembling at his sides, not with anger, but with the realization that every cruel joke he had made was now evidence against him. Captain Hayes looked like a man who had just had the wings he had flown with for 25 years torn off. His eyes drifted toward the empty space ahead, as if hoping the faint hum of the cabin speakers might offer him an answer. But all he received was the silent judgment of passengers staring at him as if he were a willing accomplice. When word came that the replacement flight crew was on the way, the cabin froze in a suspended state. No one moved. No one spoke loudly. Yet everyone knew that what happened next would determine the fate of several lives. Ethan's phone lit up again. Samantha's voice came through the speaker, sharp and precise. Like an arrow cutting straight through the tension, Ethan, the board is ready. They're asking for your final assessment before issuing the formal termination order. Ethan looked around. Dozens of faces focused on him, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to stand for them, waiting for him to continue the fight they themselves had likely endured somewhere in their own lives. He nodded slightly. "Patch them in." A soft beep sounded. Then 3 voices filled the cabin. James Porter, with his steady commanding tone, Sarah Mitchell, with razor-sharp articulation, and Daniel Brooks with a voice like metal striking a conference table. "We're listening, Ethan?" Melissa shuddered, as if doused with ice water. Trevor gripped the seat edge. Hayes closed his eyes, bracing for the blade. But Ethan didn't rush. He stepped forward, standing at the center of the cabin, with a calm so absolute it silenced every whisper. "Before I give my decision," Ethan said, "I want everyone to hear the truth from the people involved." Melissa sobbed. "They'll turn this on me. I can't say anything." Ethan didn't look at her. He turned to Lily Chen, the only member of the crew brave enough to stand with the truth. Lily trembled slightly, but her eyes held the certainty of someone holding a torch in a dark tunnel. "Lily," Ethan said, "tell them what you saw." Silence rippled through the cabin. Lily inhaled deeply. Her hand shook a little, but her voice was honest and unwavering as she stepped forward. "I saw Melissa delete Mr. Walker's name from the seating system. His ticket scanned green. Trevor said, 'Just send him to the back.' Then they joked about how someone like him didn't belong in first class." The cabin erupted with gasps. Rebecca Whitman, seated in Ethan's rightful seat, 2A, lifted a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. Thomas Whitman frowned, leaning toward Melissa. We never asked to switch seats. Melissa had no answer. Every past word now sliced back into her pride. Ethan nodded at Lily, then addressed the voices on the phone. James, Sarah, Daniel, you heard her. Daniel Brooks replied, his tone icy every word. Sarah Mitchell followed crisp as a blade. This is not just discrimination. This is a level 3 violation involving system tampering. James Porter concluded, we formally transfer full disciplinary authority to Ethan Walker. Melissa stumbled forward, panicked, Mr. Walker. Please, please, one chance. I have a family, I have. Ethan studied her for a long moment. His eyes carried no cruelty, only truth. A chance is not lost in a single moment. It is lost in every wrong choice you repeated. Melissa collapsed into her seat, shaking. Trevor spoke next. Voice, trembling eye. I was wrong. But I wasn't the one in charge. Anna snapped voice sharp as a whip. You're not a child. You knew exactly what you were doing. Jason added, and you knew it was wrong. Trevor had nothing left to say. Captain Hayes stepped forward with the heavy burden of a man watching 25 years of service crumble. Mr. Walker, I accept full responsibility. Ethan met his gaze. Captain Hayes, the worst part isn't that you made a mistake. It's that you didn't check the truth. You chose to believe the convenient lie. A commander cannot afford that. Hayes lowered his head, offering no excuses. And then Ethan delivered the verdict. Melissa Grant, Trevor Mills. Captain Robert Hayes. I am terminating your contracts, effective immediately. You will exit the aircraft when the new crew arrives. The entire cabin held its breath. Then, like a row of falling dominoes, passengers began to applaud. First softly, then louder. Then it spread like thunder across the cabin. No one clapped for the loss of someone's job. They clapped because justice had been restored. They clapped for Ethan. They clapped for Lily. They clapped for a moment where truth had triumphed over authority. When the applause settled, Ethan turned to Lily. Thank you. From this moment on, you are no longer a trainee. Lily's eyes widened. You mean you're promoted to full flight attendant, and when we land, you'll join Pacific Air's new training initiative. Small cheers broke out. A few people stood to applaud again. Carla Torres, the security officer, caught between orders, and her conscience looked at Ethan with misty eyes. Sir, thank you for understanding my position. Ethan replied, You didn't lay a hand on me. You didn't hide the truth. You will remain with us and receive further training. I need people who can distinguish right from wrong, even under pressure. Carla nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. But they were tears of relief. And at that moment, an announcement echoed from the cabin door. Replacement crew has arrived. The dismissed crew members were escorted off the aircraft. No one cheered. No one smirked. They simply watched, as if witnessing an old chapter finally being closed, a chapter no one wished to reread. Ethan returned to seat 2A. This time, no one stopped him. No one questioned him. No one dared suggest he did not belong. As he sat down, the soft click of the seatbelt echoed just for him, but carried the weight of a declaration. From this moment on, everything would change. When Ethan looked out the window, the afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, like a quiet promise signaling not just a new flight, but a new era for Pacific Air. He closed his eyes. The storm had passed. Now came the sunrise. And that sunrise began the moment one man dared to say no. The moment the airplane door opened and the 3 former crew members stepped out. The atmosphere in the jet bridge turned solid, as if the air itself had frozen around them. The cold fluorescent lights washed over the stunned faces of Melissa Trevor and Captain Hayes, making them look like shadows, separated from the safety their uniforms once provided. No more the jacket of authority. No more the polished name badge. No more the voice passengers reluctantly obeyed. Only the truth remained bare and inescapable, crashing down on them with undeniable weight. Ethan Walker followed behind them, walking with a calm, quiet power, like a judge leaving the courtroom after the verdict had been read. Two senior Pacific Air security officers stood, waiting, not shouting, not threatening, simply guiding the three terminated employees toward a separate area. Passengers in the terminal turned to stare, whispering, speculating, confused, unaware they were witnessing the moment an airline cleansed itself right there in the heart of Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Melissa wiped her tears over and over, mascara streaking under her eyes like two dark trails of guilt she could no longer hide. "Ethan, please, I swear I didn't mean," she stuttered, but when Ethan looked directly at her, her fragmented words collapsed into desperate silence. "You had many chances to stop," Ethan said slowly, each word falling like a pin pushing through her armor of self-deception. "When you refused to check the ticket, when you tore the boarding pass, when you mocked me with your colleague, when you erased my name from the log. No one forced you. Those choices were yours alone." Trevor, stripped of his usual arrogance, stood pressed against the wall as if afraid the truth itself might swallow him. Mr. Walker, I was just following Melissa's lead. I didn't." "You laughed," Ethan cut in. "You enjoyed watching someone be humiliated. You did not object. You did not do what was right. That, too, was a choice." Trevor fell silent, and for the first time, Ethan saw real regret in his eyes. Yet regret could not undo damage already done. Captain Hayes stepped forward, voice hoarse, eyes red with exhaustion and shame. "I've served this airline for 25 years. Not one passenger has ever complained about me. Please, Ethan, give me a chance to make this right." Ethan looked at the silver-haired man, his face etched with years of night flights and responsibility. For a moment, he did not see a cruel person, but someone whose professional pride had grown larger than the ethics he was sworn to uphold. "Captain Hayes, Ethan said you were once a source of pride for Pacific Air. But you lost that. You didn't just misjudge me. You didn't judge the situation at all. You ignored every sign that your crew was acting wrongly. A leader cannot afford to close his eyes." Hayes bowed his head, offering no defense. Ethan exhaled a quiet release of an invisible weight. "You may live with whatever dignity you have left, or you may cling to stubbornness. The choice is yours." Hayes nodded faintly, eyes filled with the kind of regret only those who fall from great heights can understand. Ethan's gaze shifted to Carla Torres, the security officer, who had stood in the storm, but had not let the storm control her. She looked at him nervously, as if afraid she would be pulled into the same consequences. Ethan studied her, then said, "Carla, you stood between orders and justice. But you didn't force me. You didn't shame me. You didn't join in the wrongdoing. I don't punish those who try to keep their principles in chaos." Carla breathed out, her shoulders dropping for the first time, after minutes of crushing tension. "Thank you, truly, thank you," she whispered, voice shaking with relief. As the dismissed crew was escorted away, Ethan turned toward the large glass window of Gate B14. Beyond the glass, aircraft sliced through the air on the runway, taking off beneath the soft orange glow of the afternoon sky. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with a bittersweet realization. The airline he had built had developed rot in the place he least expected. But he would not allow it to continue. He would never allow it. When he stepped back into the gate area, the passengers who had temporarily exited during the crew change turned their eyes toward him. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, hand over her heart, voice trembling with emotion. "Mr. Walker, thank you. Not everyone with power is brave enough to face the truth." Another added, "My son was treated like that once." No one stood up for him. Today I saw hope. A young man lifted a thumbs up. "You changed what leadership means to me." Their words did not fill Ethan with pride. They hardened his resolve. He addressed the waiting passengers. "Thank you for your patience. I want to personally apologize. Every passenger affected today will receive a full refund and a lifetime Pacific Air Platinum card." A ripple of astonishment and gratitude moved through the crowd. Some clapped, some smiled, some cried. But what made Ethan pause was the sight of Lily Chen standing quietly in a corner, holding her small tablet, eyes red but shining with a pride she never thought she would feel. He approached her. "Lily." She looked up, voice shaking. "Why?" "Yes, sir." Ethan placed a firm yet gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did what many wouldn't dare to do, and Pacific Air needs people like you to change it." Lily blinked quickly, her voice unsteady. I just didn't want to see something wrong happen again." "And because of that," Ethan said, "you will become an example for everyone who comes after you." Lily nearly burst into tears. From a distance, Carla watched and smiled, a small, honest smile. Grateful Lily had helped her hold on to what was right. A ground operations manager approached. "Mr. Walker, the replacement crew is ready. We can begin boarding again in 10 minutes. Ethan nodded. But as he prepared to return to the aircraft, his phone vibrated once more. Samantha reported Ethan. "I just received information Trevor and Melissa had 3 prior complaints, each one involving passengers who weren't dressed expensively. Captain Hayes knew, and he buried the reports." Ethan froze mid-step, his eyes narrowing like 2 blades. "Start a full system audit," he said. "I'm not here to fix one flight. I'm here to fix the entire airline." Samantha replied, "Order sent. The board approved it." Ethan stepped onto the plane again, but this time his heart was no longer heavy. He knew the fight had grown beyond one cabin. It had become a declaration. Pacific Air would no longer be shaped by arrogance from a few, but lifted by kindness from all. And when he sat back down in seat 2A and fastened his belt, his spirit was calm as the ocean after the storm. Not because the storm had ended, but because he knew this time he was the one steering it toward the right horizon. When Ethan Walker returned to first class and fastened his seatbelt in seat 2A, that moment was more than the simple act of sitting down. It felt as if the entire cabin, the entire airline, the entire small history of Pacific Air was shifting into a new chapter. The passengers who had just lived through the most intense turmoil of their lives still held their breath tight in their chests, their eyes following every movement Ethan made, as if he were the center of a universe rearranging itself into order. Beside him, the empty seat rested like a silent breath. No one sat there now to steal the place that belonged to truth. Rows 3, 4, and 5 were filled with gazes that shone like small beams of light, each passenger with their own story, yet all united in this single moment where a man once judged and diminished had stood up to remind everyone that fairness was not a privilege, but a right. The new flight crew entered the cabin with professional, composed, respectful demeanors. They looked at Ethan not with curiosity, nor with the fearful tension the previous crew had shown, but with a quiet reverence, the kind of respect true leaders receive without ever needing to request it. Lily Chen stood near the cabin door, wearing her newly pinned wings, her eyes shimmering with disbelief, pride, and something close to awe. She had gone from scolded intern to the spark that ignited a company-wide reform. When her eyes met Ethan's, she bowed her head gently, a thank you, spoken without words. Ethan answered with a slow nod, silently saying, "You saved this flight, Lily." That brief moment of peace was soon replaced by the gentle bustle of passengers filing back to their seats. A woman in her 60s approached Ethan, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you for not backing down. I've seen more injustice in my life than I care to remember, but this is the first time I've seen someone force an entire system to listen." Ethan looked at her, offering a thin, sincere smile. "I didn't make them listen. All of you did." A young college student standing beside his mother chimed in, excitement bubbling out of him. "Sir, you're honestly inspiring. Not like a superhero in movies, but like a real-life one." Ethan let out a soft laugh, the first genuine ease he had felt in hours. A superhero isn't the strongest person. It's the person who refuses to turn away when something wrong happens. As everyone settled in, the cabin lights dimmed into a warm, comforting gold, as if trying to soothe the minds still shaking from the chaos. The intercom clicked on, but this time it wasn't Captain Hayes's overbearing voice. It was Captain Reyes, a younger, calmer pilot brought in to replace him. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reyes. Thank you for your patience. We sincerely apologize for what occurred earlier. Pacific Air Flight number 482 will be departing in just a few minutes, and I'd like to extend a special thanks to one passenger, Mr. Ethan Walker, for helping us correct what needed correcting." A wave of soft but firm applause traveled through the cabin. Ethan didn't want the spotlight, but this moment wasn't about rank. It was about a principle he had chosen to defend. As the aircraft taxied onto the runway, streams of golden sunset light slid along the fuselage like warm ribbons. Ethan stared out the window, feeling the familiar vibration as the engines spooled up. But his mind was still lingering in the stories and voices he had heard back at the gate, the angry whispers of passengers, Lily's trembling courage, Melissa's desperate pleas, Captain Hayes's defeated resignation, and above all his own voice, the calm, steady tone that had forced an entire system to look at itself in the mirror. The engines roared softly as the plane accelerated. Ethan closed his eyes for a single second. The familiar pressure pushing into his back as the plane lifted off the ground felt like something inside him rising as well. When the aircraft leveled and the seatbelt sign turned off, the new crew began offering drinks to the passengers. From the right side of the cabin, Anna Powell leaned toward Ethan and said quietly, "What you did today, people will retell it for years. Not because you're the CEO, but because you proved something simple: everyone deserves respect." Jason Reed leaned forward from the row behind. "The video I posted is already spreading fast. I don't care about going viral. I just want the world to see how you kept your calm. People should learn from that." Ethan looked at them, a genuine smile emerging at last. If it gets even one person to think twice before judging someone, then I'm glad it spreads. Meanwhile, Lily carefully served drinks in row 4. She tried to move with the grace of a newly promoted attendant, though her hand still shook a little. When one passenger told her thank you for saving the flight, her eyes sparkled like a sky full of stars. In the galley, Carla Torres watched the cabin quietly. She had seen collapse and rebirth in a matter of hours, something most security officers would never witness in a lifetime. She thought to herself, "This time I'll do better. I won't close my eyes again." When Lily finally reached Ethan's seat, she asked nervously, "Would you like water or hot tea, Captain? I mean, Mr. Walker." Ethan chuckled softly. "Just call me Ethan. And water is fine. But remember something." Lily tilted her head. Ethan met her eyes. "You weren't just brave. You were right." Lily pressed her lips together, nodding hard, as if carving the words into her heart. In that moment, the cabin was so peaceful that one could hear the soft laughter of a child in the back, the gentle clink of ice cubes in glasses, the quiet thank yous exchanged between strangers who had become a small community in the middle of a storm. Ethan looked out the window again. Layers of white clouds stretched below like soft mountains. Something stirred in him, not exhaustion, but a deep, quiet sense of purpose. He had fought for years in boardrooms through negotiations, contracts, and corporate battles. But this flight, with all its chaos, pain, justice, and truth, was what made him feel he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. A soft announcement echoed cabin crew prepare for service. The long day was not over. But Ethan knew one thing clearly: this wasn't just a flight to San Francisco. This was the flight carrying Pacific Air into a new era. And he, the man who had once been told he didn't belong in first class, now sat right here, witnessing the moment his entire airline relearned the meaning of respect. The aircraft cut through the last streaks of daylight, heading toward a future built not on arrogance, but on courage, unity, and the unshakable resolve of a man who had once been judged by nothing more than a glance. And this was only the beginning. When Pacific Air Flight number 482 settled at an altitude of more than 30,000 feet, the atmosphere inside the cabin had transformed completely from what it was at takeoff. The suffocating tension was gone. The sideways glances were gone. The angry whispers were gone. Everything felt lighter, as if the entire aircraft had just shed a toxic layer of dust and stepped into a rare state of clarity. But beneath that peace was another current, a quiet rebirth beginning to take shape. Ethan Walker, seated firmly in 2A, did not look like a businessman relaxing, nor like a passenger enjoying the flight. He looked like an architect studying the foundation of a building that had just cracked, preparing to redesign it from the ground up. Every passenger could feel it, even as they tried to act normal. A man in row 3 leaned toward his wife and whispered, "He looks like he's thinking about the entire aviation industry." His wife murmured back, "Maybe he actually is." Lily Chen, wearing her newly pinned wings, walked down the aisle with hands still slightly unsteady, but filled with determination. She was no longer the timid intern, hiding in the corner of the cabin. She was living proof that one right action could change the fate of an entire flight. Every time a passenger said, "Thank you," or "You did great," her eyes shimmered like they held an entire world inside them. At the back of the cabin, however, Carla Torres stood alone, leaning lightly against the wall, her eyes distant, as if wrestling with a heavy thought. She had not been fired yet. A lingering guilt clung to her. She had not done wrong, but she also had not been strong enough to stop it from the beginning. Ethan noticed it when their eyes met. He gave her a small nod, a message silent but clear. You still have a chance to make it right. Meanwhile, notifications continued humming through Ethan's AirPods. Samantha Cole was working like a storm back on the ground. Ethan, the audit team has been deployed. All logs from the last 6 months are being extracted. And Ethan, you need to know this from the passenger videos. The hashtag Pacific Air Justice is climbing to top 3 nationwide. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. Not because he wanted fame, but because he understood how powerful public attention could be when pushing a system to change. Corporations fear exposure more than they fear mistakes. Let it spread, Ethan said quietly. But we won't exploit it, only use it to fix what is broken. Understood? Samantha replied instantly. When Ethan opened his eyes again, he found Rebecca Whitman, who had earlier sat in his rightful seat, 2A, standing beside him with a troubled expression. "Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry," Rebecca said sincerely. "I didn't know they took your seat to give it to us." Thomas Whitman nodded behind her. "We thought it was standard procedure. We never wanted to take part in something like that." Ethan shook his head gently. "You did nothing wrong. The wrong lies with those who chose to serve based on appearance instead of data and respect." Rebecca placed a hand over her chest, exhaling in relief, then added softly, "But we stayed silent. That is also part of the problem." Ethan's look softened, realizing that is the beginning of change. As they stepped away, Jason Reed leaned over and whispered to Anna, "I've never been on a flight this strange." Anna smiled slightly. "Strange, I think it feels necessary." At that moment, a soft chime rang through the intercom. Captain Reyes's calm, steady voice followed, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received word from Pacific Air Headquarters. A speech from CEO Ethan Walker will be broadcast to the entire airline crew once we land." The cabin stirred with whispers. Ethan leaned his head back. He knew that speech would not be about himself. It would be a message to the entire company: change or leave. But something else was unfolding. Something only Ethan and Samantha knew. The rapid internal investigation had begun revealing deeper cracks. Samantha whispered through his earbud, "Ethan, the internal team just reported more findings. It's not only Melissa and Trevor. At 3 other airports, Los Angeles, Dallas, Phoenix, there were seat log deletions involving passengers of color and passengers dressed casually." Ethan tightened his grip on the armrest, not from frustration, but from deep, controlled anger. "How many cases?" "At least 8, Samantha said. "Possibly more." Ethan looked out at the sky where the world condensed into a horizon painted in dark orange. "We will not hide this," he said. "We dig up everything. No matter who is involved. I will inform the board," Samantha answered without hesitation. As light snacks were served, a little girl of about 10 years old stood in front of Ethan's seat, holding a small teddy bear. "Mister, you're the one who helped everyone not get yelled at, right?" Ethan tilted his head and smiled. "I just helped people get treated the way they should." The girl shrugged. "My dad says you're a good guy. I think so too." Ethan chuckled softly. Sometimes the simple honesty of a child pierced deeper than any long speech. When she returned to her seat, her mother stepped closer and whispered, "Thank you. My daughter once saw her grandfather treated badly at an airport because of his skin color. Today she saw the opposite." Ethan nodded quietly, his chest settling like calm water after a breaking wave. The plane glided into calmer skies, the engines humming like a long exhale after suffocation. But the conversations inside the cabin continued. A businessman murmured to the person beside him, "If every CEO traveled with their passengers, this world might have fewer problems." A bearded college student added, "He just did what my leadership classes define as real leadership." An elderly man, nodded. It's not power that makes people respect him. It's character. Each sentence was a fragment, but together they formed a complete picture. The passengers were leaving this flight with a different view of Pacific Air and a different view of Ethan Walker. When the cabin dimmed for rest, Ethan opened his phone and reviewed the incoming audit reports, 3 concealed discrimination cases, 2 unauthorized log deletions, 1 complaint buried under insufficient evidence, and more, a system abused from within. Ethan closed his eyes not from fatigue, but from clarity. He felt more than ever the real battle would begin once this plane touched down. He remembered Lily's eyes, Carla's eyes, the passengers' eyes filled with hope. He remembered the moment the boarding pass was torn, Melissa's sneer, Trevor's mockery, Hayes's threat. But above all, he remembered the moment he stood up, not as a CAO but as a human being, demanding respect. And he knew that moment had changed everything. As the aircraft soared through the night sky, the stars reflected on the window like thousands of eyes looking toward Pacific Air's future. Ethan tightened his grip on the armrest, like tightening his grip on the fate of the airline he loved, and he silently vowed, tomorrow the entire system will relearn how to see people with real eyes. Today was only the beginning. The flight continued, and change was approaching. When Pacific Air Flight number 482 began its descent, the atmosphere inside the cabin shifted from peaceful to something quietly tense, as if everyone understood that the moment the wheels touched the runway would not simply mark the end of a flight, but the beginning of a new chapter in Pacific Air's history. Ethan Walker placed his hand on the armrest, feeling the subtle vibration beneath his palm as the aircraft cut downward through layers of clouds, just like the airline itself was cutting through years of accumulated dust to reach the solid ground of real change. In the nearby row, an older businessman leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I've flown Pacific Air for 20 years and I've never seen anything like today." Ethan gave a slight nod, his eyes fixed on the window where the horizon was widening. "Change takes time," he said, "but sometimes it only takes one moment to begin." The words made the man smile faintly, as if realizing he was sitting beside not just a CEO, but someone willing to tear open the silence that the aviation industry had hidden behind for far too long. When the wheels struck the runway with a gentle bounce, the cabin filled with a collective exhale. But for Ethan, it was not relief. It was the opening drumbeat. The intercom chimed, and Captain Reyes's warm, steady voice filled the cabin. "Welcome to San Francisco. Thank you for your patience, your strength, and your unity during today's flight." He paused. "And a special thank you to Mr. Ethan Walker for showing us what leadership looks like." A wave of applause rose through the cabin, louder than any before long, and thunderous, as if ushering a hero back onto land. Ethan simply nodded, though in his heart he knew the applause was not for him alone. It was for everyone who had spoken up for Lily, for the passengers who refused to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. When the aircraft door opened, the warm, golden lights of the San Francisco terminal swept into the cabin, illuminating faces that had just gone through a battle, but still held their heads high. Ethan waited for the passengers to exit first, but not a single person moved. A young woman called out, "No, you go first, Mr. Walker." A man added, "You're the reason we can walk off this plane with pride." A long line of eyes focused on him in agreement. Ethan stepped forward, and as if drawn into a shared, unspoken understanding, every passenger in the cabin rose to their feet, forming an aisle of honor down the length of the aircraft. No one spoke yet. Every smile, every nod, every glistening eye was a wordless thank you. The scene made Lily, standing near the door, nearly burst into tears, her hands clutching her tablet to her chest. When Ethan passed her, he stopped for half a second and whispered, "We're only getting started." "Get ready, Lily." She nodded rapidly, tears falling, but her smile bright with pride. "Yes, I'm ready." Outside the cabin, 2 senior Pacific Air executives waited, Chief Operating Officer Laura Price and Compliance Director David Lee. Their faces were tense, carrying the weight of something far more serious than a routine greeting. Ethan Laura said, her voice low, "The board wants to see you in the operations room immediately. Things are spreading fast." David added, "Footage from the flight has over 3.5 million views in 1 hour. Media pressure is rising quickly." Ethan was not surprised. "Good," he replied. "At least no one will be able to ignore this anymore." Before he could walk farther, Carla Torres stepped out of the aircraft doorway, standing tall, offering a crisp salute from muscle memory rooted in her past training. "Mr. Walker," she said, voice stronger than it had been in Seattle, "I will start again. And I will prove I deserve the chance you gave me." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You will. Prove it with actions, not words." She saluted again, determination in her eyes. Nearby, Lily stepped into the terminal, still adjusting to the rhythm of her new role, when a group of passengers gathered around her, thanking her, patting her shoulder. She smiled shyly, overwhelmed, but glowing with the kind of joy earned only through courage. Ethan watched her for a moment, then moved toward the escalator that led to the airport's operations center. He was just about to step away from the gate when a quiet voice called from behind him. "Mr. Walker." Ethan turned. It was an elderly man with silver hair, someone who had sat silently through the entire flight, never recording, never shouting, never stepping into the conflict. The old man approached his eyes, gentle but deep with a lifetime of witnessing injustice. "I didn't record anything," he said. "I didn't yell. I didn't speak up when others did." Ethan tilted his head, listening. "But I want to say this. Today you didn't just help a passenger. You helped a generation." Ethan stood still for a moment, then gently clasped the man's hand. "Thank you, sir. I won't let what happened today fade away." The old man smiled softly, nodded, and walked off. Ethan watched him disappear into the terminal before continuing forward, carrying a sense not of pride, but of responsibility, like a man who had opened a door the entire aviation industry would now be forced to walk through. When he arrived at the emergency operations room, the central screen displayed Pacific Air Special Session on the PA-482 crisis. James Porter, Sarah Mitchell, and Daniel Brooks were already connected through video conference. Their faces were sharp, tense, and focused, the expressions of leaders staring into the biggest storm of the decade. Sarah spoke first. "Ethan, you've become the center of national media coverage." James added, "But that's good. We have a rare opportunity to reform the entire system." Daniel leaned closer to the camera. "But it's dangerous, too. If we move slowly, everything could collapse." Ethan stepped forward, voice low, but unwavering. "Then we won't move slowly." He tapped on his tablet, opening Samantha's latest reports. "We will conduct a full audit of all 48 facilities, review every flight log, reopen every buried complaint, and establish a direct reporting line to the board. No detours, no hiding." The room fell silent for a moment. Then James said, "Ethan, you will lead this reform." Ethan answered without hesitation, I already started it in the sky. Now we finish it on the ground. Outside the glass wall, the lights of the airport glinted against his face. Not the face of a man humiliated earlier in the day, but the face of a leader ready to carry the longest, hardest fight of his career. And as the meeting continued, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. Pacific Air would not be the same airline when the sun rose tomorrow. Because he and the people who stood up on flight PA 482 had begun a revolution no one could stop. When the clock struck 5 o'clock the next morning, under the pale blue light of the San Francisco dawn, all of Pacific Air seemed to awaken with a completely different energy, tense, yet invigorated, as if the airline were standing on the thin line between collapse and rebirth. Ethan Walker stepped into the grand hall of headquarters, where more than 300 employees from management to flight crews had been urgently summoned overnight, an unprecedented meeting. Their eyes turned toward him, no longer doubtful, only filled with the expectation of people who understood that change was now unavoidable. The massive screen behind him displayed the words, "Pacific Air launch of the Comprehensive Reform Program." Ethan placed his hand on the podium, paused for a few seconds until the entire room focused on him, then spoke in a deep, weighty voice. Yesterday on Pacific Air flight, number 482, we witnessed something that should never have been allowed to happen. A passenger was mistreated, a valid ticket was torn, a seat log was deleted, a crew abused its authority, and worst of all, a system remained silent and allowed those actions to exist. Faces in the room lowered. Several people exhaled quietly. Ethan continued, his voice growing firmer, but the most painful part is not the mistake itself. It is the fact that we allowed the mistake to become a habit. He looked around the hall, letting his gaze meet theirs one by one. Today that ends. A beep sounded, and a series of audit reports appeared on the screen cases of seat log discrepancies. Reports labeling passengers as not suitable for the first class image recorded conversations from other facilities. Every document, like bones from a skeleton, the airline had been trying to hide under the carpet for years. Ethan took a deep breath. We will not hide anymore. Starting right now, Pacific Air becomes the first airline in the United States to implement a direct reporting system to the board of directors. No intermediaries. No one will ever have the power to bury information again. He pointed toward the screen. Every crew member, from intern to captain, will undergo a full reassessment of professional ethics, discrimination, recognition, and personal accountability. Anyone who does not pass will leave. A quiet murmur rose, but no one protested. They all understood yesterday's silence had produced today's disaster. Ethan continued. Lily Chen, the person who stood up when the entire system told her to stay silent, will become the face of our new training program. Lily, seated in the second row, rose slightly in her chair, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes, her back straight like an arrow. The hall erupted into applause. Ethan then looked toward the back of the room, where Carla Torres stood beside security management. Carla, you will join the Leadership Under Pressure program, because you proved that hesitation is still far better than blind obedience. Carla nodded firmly, her eyes glowing with determination. Ethan continued. All passengers affected yesterday have received full refunds and lifetime Pacific Platinum cards, because we do not just repair mistakes, we repair our promise. His voice lowered deep and resonant, like a heavy bell Pacific Air was not built to categorize people by wallet or clothing. We were built to bring people to where they belong in the most dignified way possible. A wave of hope spread across the hall like a rising tide. Ethan looked out through the large glass windows, where the first rays of sunlight streaked across the floor in thin bands of gold. He spoke softly. Yesterday I was told that I did not belong in first class. But the truth is, no one should have to prove they deserve respect. Respect is the starting point, not the reward. He lifted his head, his voice stronger than ever. And from this moment forward, that will be Pacific Air's guiding principle. The entire hall rose to its feet. Applause thundered upward, growing louder, shaking the room like a collective vow. Ethan looked at them, people who still wanted to do what was right, and he knew that this moment was the greatest gift he could give the airline, a new soul. As the sunlight poured in, more brightly illuminating the Pacific Air logo hanging on the wall, Ethan felt his heart grow light like the clear morning sky outside. Pacific Air flight number 482 had ended when the plane touched the ground. But the reform had only just taken off. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and system management, Ethan Walker's story is far more than an incident on a flight. It is a powerful reminder that any organization, no matter how large, can rot from the smallest behaviors if its leader is not willing to confront the truth. Justice within a company does not come from procedures or slogans. It comes from the moments when people choose to stand up, to push back, and to pay the price so the system can become better. Ethan did not just correct a mistake, he rebuilt the foundation. And that is what every true leader needs to learn. If you believe that respect must begin with the smallest actions, then like this video to help spread this positive message. Hit subscribe to follow more inspiring stories of justice. And comment below with the phrase, "Justice rise," to show that you stand on the side of what is right.